I'm Miwa Messer. I'm the producer and host of Poured Over, and I have been reading Susan Orlean since, well, she was at the Boston Phoenix, and then there was the Boston Globe, and the Village Voice, and Vogue, and Esquire, and, well, she's been at the New Yorker since 1992. So if I just dated myself, I'm okay with that because it means I've had the great pleasure of reading Susan Orlean for a really long time. Most people do know the books, though. There was, of course, the library book, The Orchid Thief, which became the film adapted by Charlie Kaufman into adaptation. And now there's a memoir, Joyride. And Susan, part of why I'm so excited to talk to you, beyond the fact that I'm a fan, is also this book was starting, you've talked about how it was going to be a creativity guide, a how-to, a nuts and bolts, how to do this journalism thing. And that's, well, it's turned into more than that.
Yeah, it actually was originally conceived of as a book about writing.
Mm-hmm.
How you write, how do you do it, what's it all about? I began thinking that writing a book about writing wasn't going to interest me as much as I wanted to be interested. It
Okay.
sounded very pedantic and kind of narrow focus. But also, I felt like without the context of what I've done and why I've done it, just writing a book about writing felt kind of one dimensional.
Mm-hmm.
So I began expanding and expanding until it really grew into a memoir that is also very much about the craft of writing, the pursuit of creativity,
Mm-hmm.
the whole underpinning of why you do what you do.
And you were never going to do anything else. I mean, that's been pretty clear since early on. You were always going to ask a million questions and chase stories. I mean, you like to write about the people who don't usually get written about. You like to chase those hidden stories. And that's part of the fun of reading you, too, because all I know when I see your byline is I won't be bored. I may not know
Well,
the subject,
great.
I may not know where we are, but I won't be bored. So I will always read the piece. And I'm wondering if we can just start with, well, the cover story from Esquire, right? That's at the back of Joyride, which is a pleasure. It's been a minute since I'd seen it, and I'm really happy it was included here. But it had started as an idea about a profile of Macaulay Culkin because Home Alone at the time was possibly the biggest movie in America.
Right.
And Esquire had said to you, oh, hey, will you do a profile of this young actor? And you were like, well, actually. And it's that well, actually moment that I really want to spend some time with.
Yeah, well, it was really interesting because Esquire at the time was launching a series that they were going to do about the different stages of a man's life. And they had written a piece in the previous month's issue about aging.
Mm-hmm.
And so this was going to be their piece about adolescence, which was going to be illustrated by a profile of Macaulay Culkin. I had never written for Esquire before, so I
Mm-hmm.
was very excited to get the call, as
Mm-hmm.
you can imagine. And Esquire in those days was a really fantastic magazine, ran great writers, great stories. So I was thrilled. At the same time, I wasn't that interested in Macaulay Culkin.
Right.
But B, and more importantly, I didn't think his life was really going to illustrate the idea of adolescence. I just thought Esquire was wrong, that writing about a young child actor was really not representative of the typical male experience of being 10 years old. So I blurted out, and I mean it, that I blurted
Yep.
out to the editor, I'm not that interested in Macaulay Culkin, but I really am interested in the idea of writing about a 10-year-old boy.
Right.
So, but if you let me find a more typical 10-year-old
Mm-hmm.
boy and write about what his life is all about. Now, at that time, I was a 30-year-old woman. I didn't have kids. Frankly, the life of a 10-year-old boy was very exotic to me
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and quite fascinating. I had no idea what childhood in that era was like,
Yeah.
certainly compared to my own childhood,
Hmm.
but also in a world of, modern technology. And just this was a new thing to examine the life of a 10-year-old boy. To my great astonishment, Esquire liked the idea and said, go ahead, give it a try. I didn't know any 10-year-old boys. So my
Hmm.
first problem was, where do I find one?
Right.
Where do I find a typical 10-year-old boy? I lived in Manhattan. I didn't want to write about a 10-year-old in Manhattan. I wanted to find a kid living in the suburbs somewhere who was
Mm.
having a more conventional American childhood. So I had to start asking my friends if they knew any 10-year-old boys, which was very funny because they didn't know why I was asking.
Right.
And I finally got introduced to this 10-year-old boy living in a suburb of New
Hmm.
Jersey. His parents were school teachers. He had a sister. He had, by all description, a very conventional American life.
Hmm.
And he agreed to let me tag along with him for 2 weeks,
Hmm.
go to school with him, hang out after school with him, and try to understand this exotic creature, which was a 10-year-old boy living in suburban New Jersey. And there it was. And it was very interesting because in that era, celebrity profiles were the very common
Hmm.
grit of the magazine world. That's
Yeah.
what many, many stories were about. So this was the anti-celebrity
Hmm.
profile, a profile of a kid who was just a kid. He was just an ordinary kid. But as I've learned in my long career, nobody is just an ordinary anything. Everybody ends up being a pretty fascinating
Hmm. Well, I know Colin loves recycling, or at least he did when he was 10. And that's the kind of detail, though, that I love when I'm reading you, because you find this tiny thing which feels tiny, and then you're like, but actually, 1992, the suburbs of Jersey. And then my brain starts galloping. Like I always learn something. And I think this is partially me learning alongside of you because you've always said, well, I like to go in sort of cold and not have opinions formed, which is kind of the opposite of interviewing an author where you're like, how much rereading can I get done in this amount of time? What's the context? How do I, sort of connect the dots for someone who may not have just done a giant reread the way I have? Whereas you get to walk in with, oh, there was the piece you did for the New Yorker about the gospel choir, which one of my favorite pieces ever. But again, you were like not doing any research, just going to ask them if I can do it. And you end up with this gorgeous piece. Also, again, at the end of Joyride. So I keep pushing people to read the original pieces as well because they're such, well, they're a joy to read.
Well, we wanted to include a few of these pieces
Hmm.
in the appendix of the
Yep.
book because I refer to them
Oh, yeah.
extensively.
Hmm.
And some of these pieces were published, as you say, quite a long time ago. They're
Hmm.
not necessarily that easy to find.
Hmm.
So we thought, let's just include them so you know what I'm referring to. And the thing is, and I want to make this clear, that
Hmm.
I like to go in cold,
Hmm.
but then
Right.
I get deep in the reporting and I
Hmm.
learn as much as I can learn. So I'm not merely having the kind of one and done experience of being around someone. And actually, in the case of writing about the 10-year-old boy,
Hmm.
I then got very interested in what academic work there
Right.
was
Yep.
on this particular phase of adolescence. What's going on when you're 10 years old? And as it turns out, it's a very important stage in a kid's life where they're first becoming conscious of the opposite sex or feelings, romantic feelings,
Hmm.
and the all of that starts being very complicated. The idea of who they are in terms of their social status. It all emerges at that age. So kids really change at that age. And it was very interesting to take my firsthand observation
Hmm.
and then couple it with this book learning that I did and, kind of bring them together in the piece.
But I think, at least my experience of reading you over time has always been that the people always sit at the forefront. I mean, even the piece you did called The Outsiders about Boston, which ran in what, 2004? It's collected in a different book. But like, what a new way to write about Boston, and yet you're writing about the Catholic Church and Whitey Bulger and busing and Arthur Garrity and all of these things where, if you know Boston at a certain period, these are all familiar concepts, and yet it's so fresh and so interesting and so new because you're also couching it in development and the way like the landscape is changing and real estate is changing and all. And again, it's a series of small details. It's like, well, that bar used to be Whitey Bulger's, but now, it's a gastropub. Or, you're talking to a kid who's working with his Latino community in Southie, and, of a certain generation, you're not thinking anyone outside of, Irish Catholics in Southie, right?
Right, right.
And you do this in what I don't know what the word count is, but I mean, when it's bound into a book, it's like maybe 12 pages. And yet
Right,
you get
right.
the scope of a place like that. It is amazing to see.
Oh, well, thank you. And this is the challenge with these stories, which is
Hmm.
I like to tease the reader into thinking this is a very, very small, specific story. But in fact, these stories are never small.
Hmm.
There's always so much more going on. That piece was enormous in its scope in terms of the change of this community, the fact that the church was shrinking and had these buildings that were suddenly available to be turned into condos. And,
Right.
it was a moment of real inflection in Boston that I wanted to capture. I think it's really a great challenge to beckon a reader in with a very, very pointed, specific, small focus. And then while you've got them kind of in your thrall, so to speak,
Hmm.
you just start opening and opening, and suddenly they find themselves grappling with issues that are much bigger and
Right.
much more profound and they're important. They have significance rather than just looking like this kind of pinpoint of an idea.
You also sent me back to John McPhee, who's a writer I have loved for years, but there's a very specific piece called Travels in Georgia. And I'm bringing it up in the context of this Boston piece, The Outsiders, because McPhee does this thing, and I don't know if he taught you how to do it or if you both just innately had this, where you're outsiders in a situation. He's in Georgia, he lives in New Jersey, he teaches at Princeton, but he is literally traveling with two scientists who are tracking rivers, but also, well, animal specimens, and there's a lot of roadkill. But the way that McPhee writes about this piece, and then Jimmy Carter pops up towards the end. And there's a reference to the movie Deliverance because it's filmed on one of these rivers that they're on. It's just one of these amazing John McPhee essays where it's like detail after detail after detail. I now know more about snapping turtles and rattlesnakes. And also at one point he gets out of a car and trots to Newark Airport because otherwise he's going to miss his flight to Georgia. And this is back in the day when, there weren't 7 flights an hour anywhere kind of thing. So
Right.
he really had to make that flight. And I feel like there's a similarity in that you're both present in the pieces. I mean, it's clearly McPhee narrating, like it's clearly you narrating. But you're pulling these details that I'm not necessarily sure that anyone else might grab. And then the way you phrase it, you're just kind of like, part of me wants to laugh. Part of me wants to just gasp a little bit. I mean, I'm not necessarily going to live in a condo that's a converted Catholic church. Um, but it's that level of detail and that sitting in the moment and doing the reporting. And I think you've said in the past that Travels in Georgia is something that you return to. It's something you reread frequently, yeah?
Yes, absolutely. It's such a brilliant piece, and as you say, it combines both. It's a very particular piece that he's traveling with these scientists who turn out to be fascinating people whose story you get very deeply engaged in, but all along the way, he's kind of lacquering layer upon layer of these observations that are so particular and so vivid that you begin feeling that you've entered this entire universe, this world is unfolding. There's another part of that piece that was very important to me, which
Mhm.
is John McVie is very clearly the narrator. It's
Yeah.
very much about a guy from New Jersey,
Hmm.
kind of a bit of a tenderfoot,
Yep.
being in, he's asleep in one of the scientists' cabin, and she has a bunch of pet snakes, and he's very nervous about the snakes maybe getting out of their aquariums. And you are very much aware of him, even though the story is not about him.
Right.
He's very present as the narrator. And what I think influenced me so much about this piece is that he ends up being, in many ways, a stand in for the reader.
Yeah.
He's essentially saying, you and I are equally kind of out of our element when we're down hiking through these
Hmm.
swamps in Georgia. And you are probably just as scared of these snakes as I am. He does this perfect job of both being making you very aware that he is the narrator, but also you feel this sort of simpatico with him, and you're experiencing this new world just as he's experiencing
Hmm.
this new world. He was very, very influential to me as a writer, and certainly seeing the way he toggles so effortlessly between giving you huge amounts of
Hmm.
information, but also making the story feel very personal and very intimate. And how he did that to me was, the model of the kind of writing I wanted to do.
I mean, it's that balancing the outsider, right? The perpetual outsider. Any journalist is pretty much going to be an outsider, even when they know their subject cold. I mean, we've got financial journalists. Even when you know your subject matter, you're still walking into a situation that you don't, right? And you've talked about feeling like an outsider at different points in your career, even at the New Yorker, which I kind of find fascinating. I'm assuming that's early in your career at the New Yorker. And also, you had changing editors and all of that kind of thing. But the idea, though, that a writer is always standing on that sort of edge, paying
Yeah.
attention to everything that the rest of us might miss because, there's muskrat cooking over the
Yes.
campfire, right? Like, I'm a little
Exactly.
distracted by the idea of muskrat. I'm like, okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
okay.
Well, and you're absolutely right. It's a position that moves it kind of fluidly between immersion, where you're in another world and you're immersing yourself in it and trying to suss it out and figure it out.
Hmm.
But you are always the outsider.
Right,
You are, by definition, you're the outsider. You're the person who's there to observe and take notes
right.
and come back and report on the story. So there's an interesting tension between
Hmm.
those two positions, because it's true, if they're cooking muskrat, you feel like I better eat the muskrat. I'm here to write about this story, and I
Hmm.
got to really embrace this new world that is unfamiliar to me. And yet you're also there as the outsider saying, I cannot believe I'm about to eat muskrat.
Yeah.
And your readers are probably along with you going, oh my God, don't eat the muskrat. you are the conduit between those two worlds, and it that's where the skill of navigating those two universes, it comes into play.
I feel like a lot of folks too really learned your byline with the Orchid Thief. And it was a slow burn on that book. It didn't come rushing out of the gate and suddenly it was, it was there was a lot of buzz in New York around it. Like all of us were reading it. We were all talking, we were all like, can you believe what is happening? Like, well, how did she end up in the swamp? And it's a really, really fun read. It had started obviously as a piece in the New Yorker. And then you expanded it into a book. And then suddenly Charlie Kaufman turns it into adaptation, which plenty of other folks know. But also, I mean, adaptation and the Orchid Thief have, well, you in common, basically. I mean, they're very, very different experiences. I do recommend both of them highly. I just think that they are very, very different experiences. But I kind of like this idea that your thing, your book that you built and created and agonized over, takes on a new life of its own thanks to Meryl Streep and Charlie Kaufman.
Right. And it's particularly interesting because it's a book that very pointedly has a very ambling
Yeah.
pace. It's very meditative. It's
Hmm.
reflecting on flowers and passion. And, I wrote the book I really wanted to write. It was optioned, and I thought, I have no idea how you're going to make this into a movie. It's not a cinematic book. I mean, the flowers are pretty, but I just don't see how you're going to make this into a movie. And of course, the movie is all about Charlie Kaufman saying, "Oh my God, I don't know how I'm going to turn this into a movie." And it's both very respectful of the
Hmm.
book. And it really is an homage to the book and the soul of the book being this eccentric meditation on the nature of passion, the sort of allure of the natural world, the sort of mechanism of obsession. And yet the movie then is about the pressure to make that a commercial film. And it's interesting because of course while I was working on the book, I was thinking, this crime, the crime of stealing these orchids, it's not a huge crime. It's not, nobody got killed. It's nobody's going to go to prison. And yet, I still really want to write this book. I still think there's a book in here about the nature of obsession and passion that I really want to write. So it's quite a great irony and a delicious irony that that book, with all of its eccentricity, turns into a movie about, do you give in to the eccentricity of a project or do you make it commercial?
It's also a movie that's weirdly about the interiority of the creative process, which we don't always get in a film. And it's something that's really hard to capture. And a lot of Joyride, there are pieces of your biography that I had just from having read you and sort of, been around your work for a long time. There are some moments in Joyride that I wasn't really expecting to have time with. I mean, certainly your first marriage, and there's some details there and whatnot. That I absolutely understand how part of that creates the person who can go do this writing, right? And part of it is, well, the writing comes first, right? But then to see yourself sort of captured in a way by Meryl Streep, which is not an experience most writers have. Um,
Yes, one or two, and that's it.
yeah, I mean, it's rarefied air. But again, I love this idea that this sort of very lightning in a bottle, fleeting kind of thing, right? Like you approach it from two different ways. There's the pure luck of the thing, and there's the finding the story, and but then there's also the discipline. I mean, you went chasing into your own archives. Your archives are at Columbia University, which I love the idea of that. That the next generation of journalists can go chasing after whatever weird notes you have on whatever. I just, it's fascinating. Um, but balancing the creative impulse with the actual work of the thing, right? Like it's not, you're never just doing one or the other. You are constantly on this tightrope, it seems, especially reading the work.
Well, and I think you really have to be.
Yeah.
I think one point I tried to make in Joyride is yes, it's about inspiration. It's about a certain talent for or a knack for picking stories and feeling inspired and being sensitive to the world around you and capturing it and building beautiful sentences. And then
Mm-hmm.
there's the reality, which is it's a business, it's an
Mm-hmm.
entrepreneurial business. You need to figure out how to put one foot in front of the other. Part of what I found really interesting was going back and looking at my trajectory as a young writer
Mm-hmm.
and thinking, oh my God, I had a lot of nerve and a lot of, I had a lot of grit. I had a lot of gusto. And I was so determined to be out there writing.
Mm-hmm.
And I just felt like I need to figure out how to do this because this is the thing I want to do. And there is a certain purely pragmatic kind of requirement to being any kind of artist. If you really want to get your work out into the world, you need to get it out
Mm-hmm.
into the world. And that can be, it can feel burdensome and kind of mundane and
Mm-hmm.
ordinary, but you got to do it. And there's a certain kind of thoughtful, organized approach that is really necessary if you want, and especially with being a writer, because you really need to think, how can I get to the places where I want my work to be published?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I need to make this phone call or make that connection and march ahead. Doing the work is necessary. Being a good writer is absolutely necessary, but you need that extra piece to be out there in the world and getting your work published and getting it published where you want to be published.
I mean, I think of you as having a really distinct voice, and it's a little bit of a raised eyebrow, but you've also always done this sort of high-low mix. So there have been the pieces about Tonya Harding, and there was the little children's beauty pageant, which still honestly freaks me out. It's really well written, and I'm glad you were there. But like, I never would have encountered that world had you not been on the byline. Straight up, I will absolutely own that reading choice. But you're in the middle of all of these kinds of pieces, but you're not judging. You're really reporting, and that, I mean, it just, it's one thing if I'm reading you in the Boston Globe Sunday magazine, right? And like, okay, Nantucket Reds. Yeah, my dad had like 8 pairs of Nantucket Reds. And also, the Madras pant, all of it.
Yeah.
Or the accent, it's it's a very specific accent, all of that kind of stuff. But to be able to be in Midland, Texas, right? Like I had no concept of Midland, Texas beyond, the baby in the well and the former president. But to understand now what like that boom and bust cycle looks like in that place, I, again, never would have encountered it. So here you are figuring out what the story is, but also how to tell it without being a snob. I mean, essentially, that's what you're doing. You're just not
Yeah.
being a snob.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I've often been asked, how do you not appear judgmental in your stories? And I said, well, because I'm not judgmental.
Right, right.
It's not that I don't have opinions, I have
Mhm.
loads of opinions,
Right,
but my overriding emotion and intellectual stance is that I'm curious.
right.
I was curious about children's beauty pageants. I certainly have feelings about whether I want
Hmm.
to participate or
Hmm.
whether I think it's a good thing to objectify little girls. But my curiosity is
Right.
there are people who do this, lots of people who do
Hmm.
this.
Hmm.
Why do they do it?
Right.
What do they get out of it? And how do they grapple with these issues that seem front and center to me, which is little 3-year-old girls are having mascara and makeup.
Right.
Well, these people are not evil people. They have different values, they have
Right.
different opinions, they have different perceptions, and they do it for reasons that are worth understanding if you believe yourself to be someone who's truly taking in the world.
Right.
You can't begin by saying, I refuse to learn about this because I don't like it.
Hmm.
Well, you don't like it based on actual ignorance because you don't actually know anything about it. It never hurts to learn about something. Then you can have every opinion in
Right.
the world, but not learning is essentially saying, I'm willing to be biased and judgmental. And that I'm first and foremost curious. Tell me about your world. Let me understand your world. And it doesn't mean that I like everything or approve of everything.
Hmm.
It's not even important though. It's important to learn about the world and learn people's stories. And I happen to think there is sometimes an extra value in learning the stories that make you a little uncomfortable.
Yeah. Oh, without a doubt. I mean, that's why I read. Straight up. I'd like
I
that's
mean,
exactly why it's just there are just some bylines that I rush faster towards than others. That's really what it comes down to for me. But I'm also thinking about some of the lessons that you share too, where you're talking about early in your career, you're writing for the Village Voice. You have ended up pitching you're in Portland, Oregon at the time. This is pre-Boston. And you've pitched a story on Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, which at the time was kind of scandal, like someone's building a compound in Portland and what is happening, and people are coming from all over the world, and maybe this guy is the future, and but you very pointedly say in Joyride too, you're like, well, this is also the point where I learned that it's possible to get a little too wrapped up in the story you're trying to report.
right, right.
And so, some of the stories I just meant, like Midland and Boston and the beauty pageants and whatnot, I mean, those come a little later in your career. And I'm sort of jumping around on purpose because honestly, watching you evolve into the voice, but also the reporter that you become, and also being able to say, well, I had this moment where I was still figuring it out and putting it there on the page.
Yes, and that story, the story about Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, was a really perfect illustration of, especially when you're first starting in your career, but I think it's a constant workplace hazard, so to speak, which is to immerse yourself in a story means putting aside your judgment, putting aside your subjective perspective on something, and trying as much as possible to really embrace it and really understand it. And that can be quite seductive. And as I wrote about in the story about Bhagwan, one of the things that was really freaky was I was there. There was more media there because they were having a big festival. And this, for anyone who isn't familiar, this was a cult that became very widespread and popular in the 80s. And they had set up a big compound in Oregon. And I'd gone out to their first big festival celebrating their new compound.
Hmm.
And it's very seductive to be around people who are all part of a shared perspective, and also Bhagwan was a very easy guru. He didn't have restrictions on drinking or smoking or sex. It was like, just enjoy yourself and be happy, and you can be part of my group. So it was a very kind of appealing pitch, which didn't seem like you would have to give up very much. And you could be part of this happy family of people. So, in the course of me being there, where I alternated between thinking, wow, this place is pretty cool. You know, people seem to be really happy. And then feeling like, there's something a little creepy about how happy everybody is. In the middle of this, a cameraman who was there with CBS News or
Mhm.
NBC suddenly announces to me that he's joining the cult and he's no longer going to be shooting the story. When I ran into him, he's packing up his camera and he said, "Yep, I'm, joining." And I thought, "Oh my God, this is scary."
Right.
And there was a moment of feeling like, have I gotten in too deep? Am I the
Hmm.
next thing I know, I'm going to be joining? And this is the fascinating challenge of nonfiction reporting, which is
Hmm.
you need to tiptoe to that edge, but you need to know when you got to the edge where you can say, wait a minute, I'm here to write about this. I'm not here to be part of it.
Hmm.
It's a tricky place to be, and it's been written about through the course of the world of journalism as one of these fascinating challenges.
Hmm.
How can you get really close? How can you get really close to your subject and yet also step back and go,
Right.
wait, hold on a minute. I'm not joining the cult. I'm writing about the cult. And yet you need to be able to get very close to
Hmm.
do the great story. You need to hear people. You need to suspend your judgment and say, tell me why you're here, why you've given up your job at an ad agency in Portland to join the
Mm.
cult out in the desert. I have to be able to hear you. So it was a really interesting story to include in the book
Right.
because, and I think as a younger reporter, I was still a little shocked by how it felt to suddenly think, whoa, I've lost my way.
I mean, intimacy is a double-edged sword, right? You want the reader to have it at all moments, kind of thing, right? But at the same time, a reader's sense of intimacy is still going to be based on their own experience. So whatever they've had in the world, they're bringing to your work, right?
Yes.
Even if it's Charlie Kaufman doing his adaptation, that's great. Thank you so much. But at the same time, I mean, this piece goes out into the world, and that's kind of where it ends for you. It's just, it goes.
Right.
And readers either get it or they don't, and they bond with you or they don't. Like it's kind of fascinating, especially when I look at the subjects that you choose. I'm also laughing a little bit because I did not know Blue Crush was based on an article that you were trying to write that didn't work. And I was like, what?
Right.
The surf
Yeah.
movie? What? How did, but it
Right.
kind of makes perfect sense that, here comes this other form of art, this other piece of art that essentially comes out of a scrapped story because the women you were
Well,
going to,
well, I ended up writing the
oh, you did.
story.
Yeah, sorry,
Yeah.
sorry. You did.
Yeah. What happened was I was asked to do a story about these surf
Hmm.
girls in Hawaii.
Right,
And I flew out to Hawaii, and the girls whose names I had been given,
right.
I called each one, and each one said, nah, I'm not into surfing anymore. I thought, oh my God, my story has fallen apart, and I
Hmm.
come all the way to Hawaii. And my editor said to me, well, as long as you're already in Hawaii, just enjoy, stick around for another
Right.
day, enjoy being in Hawaii. I had one last name on my list of girls, and I was so downhearted that I thought I'm not going to call another girl. I mean,
Mm,
I assumed she would just say again, no, I'm not into surfing anymore.
right.
I called this young woman and she said, oh, yeah, I'm really into surfing. And I started saying to her, oh, God, Gloria, you can't imagine. I've had this complete disaster where I called all of these other
Right.
girls and they've all said, no, they're not into surfing. She said, oh, you've got all the wrong girls. I will
Ah.
introduce you to the right girls.
Okay.
So next thing I know, I'm in Hana
Yep.
and meeting these girls who were all avid surfers
Hmm.
and lived and died for surfing. I wrote this story, which ran in Outside
Okay.
Magazine, and that then was optioned and became
Okay.
the movie Blue Crush.
So, but it's not certainly the last time you're ever going to reinvent the material, right? The material leads you in a different direction. The library book was a yes, it's set in Los Angeles, but I mean, this book was sat on top of the bestseller list everywhere. And it was a delight to see too, because those of us who know Los Angeles and know the fire, this is the fire that hit the Central Library in Los Angeles in 1986. And it was devastating, but it was also a year where we had the Challenger accident and we had Chernobyl and we didn't have the internet. So news traveled differently, like all of this. And you talk about going back to look for the story in the New York Times. And it's like, well, the Times had already printed. By the time the fire started, that day's edition of the Times had printed. So it was like, I don't know, a couple days later, it finally showed up.
Right.
There was that weird lag kind of thing. But, you thought, oh, hey, there might be this person that everyone thought had a bigger role. And you go hunting for this. So it's part mystery story. It's part love of library. It's part, well, biography of Los Angeles in a way, right?
Yes.
I mean, you're
very
doing
much.
a lot with this book. And I was just excited that people everywhere were reading. I'm like, see, this is not a regional book.
Yeah, well, it was interesting because when I wrote The Orchid Thief, of
Hmm.
course, in the back of my mind, I thought this takes place in Florida. Maybe it will really only resonate with people in
Yeah,
Florida. And I was very happy to discover that wasn't the
yeah.
case. In the case of the library book, like you, I had that initial concern that why would anyone outside of LA care about a fire that took place in the
Hmm.
LA library? However, libraries are universal. If there is
Absolutely.
any universal in this world of ours, it's libraries. They are
Yep.
literally all around the globe. There is no country that doesn't have libraries, literally. You go to the poorest country in Africa, and they have mobile libraries that travel by elephant from village to village.
Hmm.
It's something that everyone around the world feels some connection to. They've been part of the history of human civilization for a very long time. Then throw in the fact that LA is a local place, but it's
Hmm.
also very much a global city
Yep.
that people relate to all around the world.
Hmm.
And take the most fundamental piece of this, which is books
Yeah.
and books and their primacy in the whole world of the human experience.
Hmm.
Books are so fundamental. So, and the idea of burning books is a very kind of primal horror
Yeah.
that is felt really everywhere. And it's interesting, of all my books, the library book has been translated into the most
Yep.
languages. It has had the most global
Hmm.
appeal, when you could say, but it's just a story about a fire in downtown LA. But it's so much more than
It
that.
is. It is.
At the same time, I also feel like people love a good story.
Hmm.
And we all read stories that are both specific and universal, that they need to be specific in order to have depth and complexity, but from that specificity you almost always draw some universal truth or universal experience that goes beyond
Hmm.
that.
I mean, I'm always surprised when I read you. Always, always, always. It might be just a single detail. It might be been thinking about that. Interesting to see someone else verbalize. It's rarely what I expect it to be either.
I
And
love that.
yeah, no, I've been reading you a very long time. But there's something to be said, and it might be too, because I came up sort of on the heels of Didion and Wolf and Hunter S. Thompson and Mailer and all of, sort of that new journalism moment, right?
Right,
Some of which is great and some of which feels like of a very specific moment, right?
right, right.
And that's great. And I do hope people go back and look at some of it because, I mean, some of it is wild and some of it, again, I'm just like, well, it's good that we have a historical record. This is kind of,
Right,
I
right.
mean, but I will never not laugh on that drive from Los Angeles to Las Vegas and you're passing Barstow. I will never not laugh at that exit. I'm sorry. I just like I'm a 12-year
Yeah,
old. I will always laugh. Will I ever reread Fear and Loathing? I'm not sure
right.
I
And
will.
I think like any period of time, some of that work has aged really well.
Mhm.
Some feels more like a sort of artifact of a
Yeah,
period.
without a doubt. Without
Yeah,
a doubt.
and so it has its value in its own way, but it hasn't sort of moved into the classic, I would say most of us would look at much of Joan Didion and
Yeah.
say, that's not about a moment. It certainly conveys a
Mm.
lot about a moment, but it's kind of has risen above that to become iconic.
I think a lot of folks might be surprised too that actually the White Album is the place where you find her packing list along with Eldridge Cleaver and Huey Newton, and it's like, and the
Right.
Doors. Like
Well, right, right.
it
I
is,
think people flip through that book and read bits and pieces
yeah.
and not so much the entire thing front to back.
It's yeah, it is absolutely a trip to sit down with it. But again, it is that voice, it's that sense of voice, and which I get from you, obviously, where it's like, oh right, okay, I know where I'm going, sort of. I mean, basically, I know I'm going to get a great story out of it. I don't know what's going to be left at the end, but I know that it is worth whatever time it takes to read the piece and follow your curiosity, right? Like it's just kind of like, okay, I'm good. I'm going to hand myself over. I know where, and when I say I know where I'm going, it's literally, it's like, well, Susan's telling me a story. I'm good.
Right. Well, to me, that's the greatest compliment because I feel that what I want is readers to trust me.
Hmm.
If I say, look, this is genuinely worth your time.
Hmm.
This is really interesting. And I've often said to people, my favorite compliment has been when someone says to me, boy, I never thought I'd read a book about orchids.
Right.
Never thought I'd read a book
Right.
about a library. And I think, well, that's amazing. That's kind of fantastic
Right.
that you did.
Yeah.
You, and it's almost even better than if you absolutely thought you would read a book about orchids.
Right.
It's the trick involved, or I shouldn't say trick, but the alchemy is
Hmm.
saying, just trust me.
Yeah.
Let me lead you into this world that you perhaps don't think you have
Mm.
any particular interest in, and let me show you why it's so interesting and beguile you the way I was beguiled.
Hmm.
Because
Hmm.
I rarely write about things that I'm interested in to begin with.
Right. Right.
I usually am writing about things that I'm not interested in or that I know very little about
Hmm. Hmm.
and that I feel like I can't quite not think about them. And they sort of nag at me until I think, all right, I'm going to write a story about this because I don't understand it or I can't figure it out. So I'm going to go dig deep.
I also do just think of you as always putting people in the foreground. Like you are always writing about people. I mean, the situation may change or the place may change or, where you are in the moment might change, but it's always about the people. And Joyride too. There's a cast. I mean, there are a lot of magazine names that folks will recognize. There are some book editors that folks will recognize. But ultimately, it is about a community. It is, sometimes the book business is weird. I will totally own that. I've been a bookseller
Yes.
for a really long time. Sometimes the book business is weird. But other times, you can read a piece and suddenly people are like, oh, right, you read that too. Right.
Yeah.
There's that water cooler moment where you're like, I cannot believe how much I love this weird little thing.
Yeah.
I also still love to read on paper. I mean, listen, I'll listen to audiobooks. I will read on my phone. Like I live in the world, right? Like technology has made many things useful and easy to like. It's a delight to jump into the archive for the Paris Review or the New Yorker or something like that.
Right.
Like that can be fun. But sometimes you just want to hold a thing in your hand and be like, what
Yeah.
did I just read?
Yeah.
What just
And go
happened?
back and review it.
Yeah.
And yeah, absolutely. And I think that the I am pretty sort of wide open to any way in which people consume
Right.
writing. I feel like do it however you're able to do it the most or is most comfortable for you, whether it's an audiobook or an ebook or the physical book. The basic sort of functional importance is, let me tell you a story.
Yeah.
Let me tell you this crazy story about going to the World Taxidermy Championships. Let me tell you
I love that piece.
crazy story about climbing Mount Fuji. And if you don't have an interest in taxidermy, that's okay. I promise you it's an interesting story. You're going to enjoy it.
Yeah.
And however you encounter that storytelling, I feel like at its root is this exchange between I've gone out and adventured, so you can stay home and be comfortable, and then I'm going to come home and say to you, okay, I'm back from hiking through the swamp. You never have to do it, but I will describe to you what it was like to walk through a swamp in South Florida and why it was really interesting. That's my designated role, is to be the one who goes out there and does it and then comes back to deliver the story to you.
Which means then we get to enjoy the reading of the thing. And speaking of the reading of the thing, have you started a new project? Are you one of those writers who does the I must have multiple things happening, or I must have a new project started as the last one comes out into the world?
Well, I am a little bit. I tend to feel, well, each time I finish a book, I think that's it. I'm never writing another book. There are no book ideas left in the world. And I feel this sense, the bit of that slump of feeling it's over. That's it. Writing is over. But what happens, and there have been pauses where I didn't start on a project right away, but I always have my antenna up. And in this case, I stumbled into a book idea quite unexpectedly that I kept saying, no, 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 no. And then finally I said, yes, I'm going for it. So it's a little early to talk too much.
That's okay.
But as much as I am savoring being done with a book, I'm also opening up a new file in Microsoft Word with this new project in mind. And I'll dive in to start the reporting probably after the first of the year.
Okay, I'm going to sit quietly in the corner. All right, Susan, before we give up all of Joyride, because I will, again, I'm delighted by the title. I think it absolutely represents what you're doing on the page here. And you don't have to have followed Susan's work for as long as some of us have. But if you have, it's a treat. If you haven't, it's a treat. It is just, I'm so glad this book is out in the world. And I'm hoping, too, that if you haven't read The Orchid Thief and you haven't read the library book or Rin Tin Tin, also, we needed more time to do the other books, okay? That's the only reason we didn't talk about animals or Rin Tin Tin. We just needed more time. Go find Susan's books, because it's really, you're in for a treat. And Susan, thank you so much for joining us on Poured Over.
Thank you. This is my pleasure.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.